The conversation is, why are Indigenous and Inuit peoples treated so differently? It's a genuine question. So the Inuit traditional homelands are in northern Labrador, northern Quebec, Nunavut, Northwest Territories. It's considered 1/3 of Canada's landmass and 50% of its coastline. When Canada was founded in 1867, Inuit homelands were not part of the country. For that reason, Canada's constitution made no reference to Inuit. No treaties had been negotiated with them, nor were Inuit mentioned in the Indian Act. This meant that when Canada's border expanded to include the traditional territories where Inuit lived, the relationship between Inuit and federal and provincial governments was undefined in many ways, including whether Inuit had the right to vote in federal elections. In theory, Inuit gained the right to vote in federal elections when Canada expanded north and their homelands became part of Canada. In reality, Inuit continued to live and govern themselves in traditional ways. Interactions with federal government were limited, and Inuit were not offered voting services. In 1934, federal election laws were changed to specifically exclude Inuit from voting. The reason for this exclusion was the emerging view that Inuit were a federal responsibility like First Nations people. Since First Nations people were denied voting rights, Inuit were also excluded from voting. Over the decade and after the Second World War, the federal government began to change its views of the North and of Inuit. There was a greater focus on the North for economic resources and Arctic sovereignty. Seeking to provide better services for Inuit and Northerners, the federal government created a network of service centers across the North and settled Inuit around them. They were given the right to vote in 1950, when Parliament decided that Inuit were distinct from First Nations people. They did this because, unlike First Nations people, they were not exempt from paying taxes. So they actually gained the right to vote a full decade before First Nations people. I know that I've seen personally, and this is just more me storytelling and anecdotal, but I've heard a lot about how there was a hard, like, I live in Vancouver, right? And we went on a whale watching thing. And they were talking about how the whale population really dwindled down because at one point there was a lot of whale hunting happening. Obviously a different area, but I have heard that when the settlers came to Canada, they were overhunting the whale population, and that really affected the Inuits' ability to get food because they heavily relied upon whaling. But when it came to the difference between the two groups of people, the settlers overhunted, but they didn't use all parts of the whale, whereas Indigenous people have found a part, like something to use every part of the whale for. So like they would even use the bones and the fat and all of that. So I've seen on here people, they'll have chunks of it's like blubber and fat and all of that frozen, and that's kind of a traditional thing for them that they had spanning thousands of years. But with global warming, it's affected the ice, it's affected so many things. Overfishing is a problem. But the conversation is different primarily because the Canadian government viewed the problems as two separate issues, and they were kind of further north. It's such a northern area in Canada, and we have the second largest landmass country in the world. We have it's just so much space, and we don't have a heavy population. Like the population of Canada right now currently would essentially fit in the population of California. So even though we do have millions of people, we have this large amount of land mass. It's very spread out, it's very thin, and even when you get to remote parts of Ontario where you have Indigenous populations or Indigenous, you have reserves, they're remote, they're hard to get to, and that's not even going up even further north where you now face things like more ice, right? I have a friend who's Inuit, and when I watch her going home, it's always by plane, and that isolation component, I think, plays a part in this, because it says even though they had the right to vote, they weren't given the services, meaning you as an Inuit person had the right to vote, but you had to go down to a more populated area to vote. So did you really have the right to vote because you couldn't exercise your right to vote?